Just a heads up, this podcast will deal extensively with the subject of rape, and it's not going to be appropriate for all listeners. If this podcast does bring anything up for you, then please call 1-800-RESPECT, which is 1-800-737-732. It's the National Sexual Assault, Domestic and Family Violence Counselling Service, and we'll have a link in our show notes.
It wasn't going to be my narrative that I was a rapee. I hadn't become a career rapee.
From the Mamamia Podcast Network, I am not Mia Friedman, but this is No Filter, candid conversations that count. My name is Jessie Stephens, and you might know me from Mamamia Out Loud. But today I'm in your ears to share a story from one of Australia's most prolific and influential and divisive icons. When people think of feminism, they think of Germaine Greer. Her manifesto, The Female Eunuch, was released in 1970, and 48 years later, we're still talking about it. But what happens when an icon, whose job it is to be provocative, exists in a culture of outrage? Most recently, the release of her Melbourne University press book, called On Rape, has led to an onslaught of headlines condemning her brand of feminism and even questioning her relevance in 2018. The essay endeavours to rethink rape. Statistics currently suggest that 1 in 5 women will be raped, but the conviction rates are absolutely abysmal. So what needs to change? Greer thinks the answer might be shorter sentencing. And if rape is sex with the absence of consent, then aren't married women being raped several nights a week? And is that, in fact, more traumatic? So how do we have nuanced conversations in a very unnuanced world? And what's Germaine actually trying to tell us? Here's the one, the only, Germaine Greer. In the last few weeks, I have seen a lot of headlines about Germaine Greer. And they said Germaine Greer calls for punishment of rape to be reduced. Germaine Greer says most rape is just bad sex. From feminist firebrand to professional troll, Germaine Greer's dangerous ideas about rape. I read all of these headlines, and this is not the book that I read. I sat down and read your book in one sitting, and they don't at all reflect the essay that I read. Why do you think people are so outraged by your ideas?
Well, they're not usually. I mean, it doesn't happen in England. They're used to me. I'm around all the time, and they pretty much know where I'm coming from. And there's lots of people who just want to hear me say it because they've got so sick and tired of what the current pieties are, especially when the situation of women just seems to be getting worse, really, whether you're talking about single mums or childcare or medical care or pensions or aged care, all of that. It just gets worse and worse and worse, and all the caring that should be done by a pseudo-socialist state is just more and more falling into deliquescence. And these are real people, and not a dozen of them, and not a few pressure groups. These are hundreds of thousands, millions of women whose lives are getting worse and worse all the time. And they know that I've got my eye on it and that I'm fed up with it, and that I'm very likely to get really angry and incandescent about it. And if I turn up to talk anywhere, they're there.
Did you expect this response?
In Australia, yes. I mean, Australia does outrage.
Why?
Because nothing's happening. That's why. I mean, you had a government and it just fell apart. You had an intelligent Prime Minister who somehow couldn't do anything, who was terrified that if anybody voted, they'd vote against him, so he gave them nothing to vote for. So then his colleagues, kicked him out.
So I found your reference to the case, which everyone was super interested by, especially with the Four Corners recently, about Luke Lazarus. And one of the criticisms of your essay is that people feel as though you're conflating rapes like Luke Lazarus with what's going on in the marital bed. Do you think they're two different acts, or do you think they're related?
I think they're related, and this is what's happening with the change of attitude in the world. I mean, there is this thing called the Istanbul Convention. Now, that's trying to systematize rape law, or actually gender law, or even women's law over the world. So it's to do with intimate partner violence, it's to do with FGM, it's to do with trafficking, it's to do with childcare, and there's an attempt to make the law on a worldwide basis consistent. They have no chance. And the reason for that is that historically the law is a mess. And it's driven by misogyny. Just tarting it up won't change it. Its basic misogyny is obvious when you look at it. When you look at the first moment when somebody like Saxon Mullins goes to make her complaint, already you realise that she's in serious trouble. The chance that she'll get out of there without taking more damage, and in some ways worse damage, than a humiliating episode is nil, absolutely nil. But they have arrived at a principle, and that principle is that non-consensual sex is rape. And that means, because it's a generalisation, all non-consensual sex is rape. So don't keep rape for the bits that have force or violence. That's unjust to women too, because it means, for example, in the case of the girl who was gang raped by La Manada in Spain, that gave rise to all that fuss and bother, with everybody clamouring for a rape verdict, they had to bring in a sexual assault verdict because there was no violence, because she hadn't resisted. Well, if you're going to tell women to resist, why don't you just tell them to get killed? I mean, that's what happened to Maria Goretti, who was the bane of my youth. I'd sit there in my Catholic school thinking this woman must have been stupid, that she actually got herself murdered rather than allowing herself to be raped.
So do you think that it's almost what happens after the rape and the criminal justice system that is causing the trauma to rape victims? Do you think that that's part of what's making the whole situation worse?
Well, it's definitely part of what makes the situation worse, because even if you're determined to actually get your narrative out there and get people to understand what the nature of the outrage is, it isn't going to happen. I mean, apart from, I cannot imagine what it must feel like when you go through all of that, and sometimes for weeks and weeks and weeks. At the moment, the British police in England, if you make a rape complaint, they'll take your mobile phone and they'll keep it for 2 years while they scan its entire content to find evidence of your sexual looseness, or you're saying that you've had sex with this guy and it was consensual or something. And you just don't get it back. In fact, one woman who had been stalked by an ex-partner was killed because she couldn't make the call because the police had her phone.
And they're not doing that to the perpetrator, are they? Or the
well, they
alleged
don't
perpetrator?
have to. I mean, the thing is that we know that the accused man has civil rights. And I would not be in favour of abrogating them. That would be a wrong move. So that he is simply convicted on the unsupported evidence of the woman who says, I didn't consent. He is allowed to say, I thought she did. And his defence team will say, she didn't scream, she was drunk, she'd had way too much to drink, whatever. It was 4 a.m. And he's got to be able to call on all the forces at his disposal to save his life, but that's partly because of the tariff. And that tariff, I just think, are you kidding? You know, if they get the conviction, you've got 9 years. Now, you know, I've been raped. It was unpleasant. But it's something Saxon Mullins said as well that really touched me when she said, I realised I'd ruined his life by making my rape complaint. And she probably has. But if he was going to jail, it'd be serious. And we exist with ruinous conflict as family members. You know, you've got kids, they're beating each other up upstairs in their rooms. You don't rush up the stairs and napalm them or make it 10 times worse. You're actually looking for ways of living together. You're reducing the damage rather than bigging it up. And in the case of rape, there is a damage. It's not devastating. There are much worse ones. A knife is a worse weapon than a penis. A penis is actually a fairly inoffensive little object. but they do want to turn it into a kind of rocket and big up what it does to people. I don't understand why there are women who have PTSD after a rape.
Really? Don't you think that there's something about the invasion of privacy and compromising your sense of safety in the world, and we have an understanding that when we walk around the world we have bodily autonomy, and then when someone betrays that, it can sort of change the way you think. Do you think after you were raped that there was trauma, that you were traumatized?
I was certainly knocked about, and I was wandering in the street. I wouldn't go back to the party because I thought everyone would be able to see what had happened to me. I was embarrassed and humiliated like that. But it wasn't going to be my narrative that I was a rapee. I hadn't become a career rapee. I wasn't going to elaborate it or dwell on it, or it's like most women, I think. It's like the woman dealing with, the kids beating each other up upstairs, that you want it to stop. And you want that behaviour to stop. Now, we tend to think that it's women who have all these problems, but I don't think we understand how dangerous the world is for young men, or even men of any age. I mean, a middle-aged man going round a corner in the East End of London and seeing 4 boys coming towards him is going to shit himself, because the chances that he'll take a kicking and lose his wallet are high. And what can he do about it? And that's humiliating, because he's been degraded, he's been thrown to the ground, he's been treated as awful. We don't live in a safe world, and if we have a delusion that we do, then we'd be better off without it.
Did you feel angry in the wake of what happened to you, or do you think that it changed your sexual relationships or how you approached intimacy? I hadn't had very much intimacy at that point. I knew when I was in trouble because he kept saying, say, fuck me. I thought, no! And I went through that thing of clenching my teeth and just saying, no, I won't say it. And I knew why he was doing it. He was doing it so that he could say that it was consent. So that I knew there was a kind of legal thing going on here, but I don't know where I got it from. But it was in my head. I could see what he was at. And he was belting me over the head. And I still don't know, did I say it? Did I finally say it? I do remember saying, be quick. And he was quick. But I remember thinking that he needed me to struggle, that he wasn't potent unless he was holding someone who was struggling. And that's made me think ever since that his sexuality had been forged in violence. Maybe when he was a little boy, that he had got all mixed up with being violently assaulted and being excited by it, like a man who discovers he's turned on by being whipped or by rubber ground sheets because he was in the Scouts. You know what I mean? That's a very empathetic perspective. I think there's a lot of people who read about rape or hear about rape and don't want to know what happened to the perpetrator that could have possibly led them to that point. But
I still feel bad about that. I knew I couldn't get anywhere. There was no redress for me. I'd run away from home. I was living in a flat with 4 men who'd taken me to the party. I was their au pair. But what they did had an effect on me as well, because I was staggering around in the street. He'd been kneeling on my thighs. It forced them apart. He was a rugby player, and I couldn't stand up. When he let me get out of the car, I couldn't stand up. And he said to me, "What's the matter with you?" And I thought, you are mad. You've just put me through that, and you're surprised and I'm not skipping about and going back to the party saying, hardy ha ha, that was fun. And what happened was a car came down the hill towards me, and I didn't even hail it. I just stood there, and the car pulled up, and it was a man and a woman. I haven't thought about it very much lately. I mean, it's a long, long time, 60 years ago. But I realise now, if there'd been 5 men in that car, that might have been the last you ever heard of me. Because I was a wounded creature, and they probably would have attacked me. I say probably, men get furious if I talk like this, but just have a look at the stories and see how it works. Gang rape is a sport now, and it's carried out by, guys who do it for bonding and togetherness, and so they have something that binds them, which is a shameful secret and shared criminality. And they're good at that. They're good at all that bonding and building of hierarchies. But what actually happened was interesting. These people, they said, "Can we help you?" And I said, "Please take me home." And they took me back to the flat in St Kilda Road that I worked in. And I just lay on my bed and thought, what do I do now? I mean, what should I do? And the guys came home. They realised I wasn't there. They also realised that this guy was there, and they knew his form because he'd done it before. And they came home and just came to see me and said, "You all right?" And I said, "I'll be fine," licking my wounds. But what they did after that was interesting, because they brought him to the flat. They showed him to me and they said, "Is this the one?" I said, "Yeah." Right. And they took him into the front room and shut the door. And what happened there is that they said to him, "You like to surf at Torquay? Don't go there anymore. You're not welcome there. You ski, Hotham? Like to go to Hotham? Yeah, don't go there. We get you above the snow line, that's the end of you." And he believed them, and he disappeared. He went to Sydney. That's all happened in Melbourne. And I saw him later, and also he raped someone else. He raped a woman who was engaged. Ridiculous. He was mad. What had happened is that this engaged couple going to a party, the party was short of grog. The guy said, "I'll go get the sly grog. I'll go down to the sly grog joint, and you take my fiancée to the party." He raped her on the way to the party.
Oh my God.
Mad as a hatter, really. And they complained to the police. They were going to go ahead with the trial, and they rang me and asked me, because we kind of knew, we were all public school people, university students, and so on. And I hadn't made a secret of what had happened to me. I wasn't ashamed of it at all, and I was angry. He rang me and said, "Would I give evidence in the trial?" And I said, yes, I would, because I thought it was important that the court be informed that he was a repeat offender and that he was a very dangerous man, and he really had to be stopped somehow or other before he ended up killing someone. But what happened in that case is that the young woman went right to the day before the hearing and said, "I can't do it. I can't go through it."
What would you say to someone who has been raped and they're trying to decide whether or not to report it? Would you report it today?
Well, this is what's so bloody annoying about it all. We've got people running around now saying, "Oh, come on, girls, be courageous, come out, name your rapist, da-da-da, get involved in all of this." And you think, just have a look at the statistics, please. You're saying to a young woman that she spend the next year or two of her life preparing to be examined to see whether she stands up as an exhibit in a case of rape. And then the prosecution fails? What are you going to do to mend her after all of that? And the answer is nothing. She's got to go off with everybody saying, "See, they lie." But there are obvious things that are mad. The thing that makes me most astonished is you've got a story like the one of Saxon Mullins, but there are plenty more, the one in Belfast of the 4 rugby players. And everybody knew what they did. They made a joke of it, and when it was described in court, some of the people in the court laughed. They thought it was funny that she was spit roasted, which means she had a penis in her mouth and a penis in her anus. And the two guys looking at each other across her back. Terrific, guys. Fantastic. We knew they did that, but they couldn't make the consent thing stand up. The guys all said, no, she was getting off on it. What was she doing there? She'd climbed in our cab. She invited herself to the house, and we were giving her a good time. That's what we thought. And they got acquitted of all charges. And you think, hang on a minute. Why do we have to acquit them because of that one consent thing?
There's a feminist war cry at the moment that you I think you refer to it in the essay, about the sort of 4-word slogans that go around, whether it's yes means yes, and it's an oversimplification. But the other one I hear a lot is believe women, and it's sort of 2 words that's meant to summarise the entire argument. What do you think about those 2 words?
Well, you just have to understand the double bind of that particular law. What the judge should tell you if you're serving on a jury in a case like that is that you're believing the defendant that she consented does not mean that you don't believe the complainant. She did not consent. He thought she did. Now, I told a joke last night about how men misunderstand what's going on in sexual encounters. A very clever Italian joke, which I think sums up men's delusions. You know, I think there, your penis gives you tremendous fun. Your hands are seldom off it. And you think if you give me a bit, I'm going to have tremendous fun too. And you just happen to be wrong. So it's not even a question of believing women. I believe them. I believe, in the case in Spain, you know, the Spanish law says it's rape if she has been forced and if she's made resistance. If she hasn't, it's sexual assault. But what nobody seems to have noticed is the men were sentenced to 9 years each for sexual assault. It wasn't trivial, but they never mentioned that. And the other thing was that they paid her, or they were supposed to pay her, 10,000 euros each. Now, I'm not sure that I wouldn't think that was a deal. If I was a university student, 10,000 euros could come in handy.
I wanted to ask you as well. You reference Me Too, I think only once in the essay, and it's a brief sort of mention. And I thought that was interesting because, you know, the Me Too movement hit last year and has a lot to do with rape and consent. Why did you make that decision?
Well, the thing is, I'm not impressed by Me Too.
Why's that?
Well, I wasn't impressed by the jamboree at the awards ceremony where they were all dressed in black and so forth, or the display of sexual victimhood, including, you know, a good deal of naked, pumped-up body of various sorts. But also, it's the non-disclosure agreement. Bugger that. You know, there you are. You've got your employer in a cleft stick because you've caught him out, you know, fucking someone in the typing pool and making her cry. So you go and knock on the door and say, right, we know what you did to so-so in the typing pool, and we're going to put it in the paper. You see where I come from? That's blackmail. I don't go for blackmail, and I don't go for being paid off either. But the other thing is, do you notice that Kevin Spacey, one of the cases against him has been dropped? And the reason for that is they've got to this statute of limitations. Why wait to the end of the 20-year statute to start the activity? I mean, what exactly are you doing apart from being incompetent? So the Kevin Spacey thing, there he is looking smug as a bug in a rug because everyone knows what he did and it's come to the end of the line and nobody can do anything about it. So I have to ask, why didn't you do this years ago, one? And why do you think that you're going to actually succeed now? The police have laid the first charges against Harvey Weinstein, and they are not using anyone from the Me Too movement. Because if they did, the case would fail. Because the women's position is known, and they are a pressure group, and the police can't afford to get involved with that. Because the whole thing about a rape victim is that she's got to be an innocent piece of information. So you don't have a lawyer telling you what to say. You have to answer the questions spontaneously, innocently. I mean, it's treating you as a child, but there's no surprise there. We live in a patriarchate. And that's the other thing about the whole rape, consent thing, is you're still acknowledging the power of the patriarchate and its right to manage these matters. You go and make your complaint to the police. The state takes action in the interests of the state, not in the interests of you. Now, if you want to bring your own action, you can bring a civil prosecution. The burden of proof will be lower. The jury will believe you. You've put your money where your mouth is. You're paying a lawyer who will probably leave you skint. And you run another risk of being done yourself for contributory negligence. They can say, in that case, what were you doing in that place? Why had you had so much to drink? Or whatever. They can also do the owners of the place where the offence happened for not exercising proper security. It becomes a whole different ball game. Now, you're in the middle of it. You've started it, and it's in your interest, and you're looking for recompense. But you have to prove you've been damaged. And how easy is that? Because most rapes don't leave a mark, don't leave a scar.
I wanted to ask you, finally, while I have you, I read The Female Eunuch when I was about 16 or 17, and it changed my life, changed the way I thought, as I know it has for so many women. And I want to know whether you think that in 2018 we live in a better world or a worse world than the world in which you wrote that book.
Well, I'm not going to ask if the patriarchate is any better now than it was then. I think it's probably worse because the ridiculous protections that old-fashioned patriarchy offered to women no longer stand. Women can be hit, women can be humiliated, and they'll shut doors in our faces and so on. Thanks, guys. And I don't think anything's better from that point of view. But what is different? And I think it's amazing, and it makes my heart stand still sometimes, is that women are different. And that so many women have just lifted up their heads and thought, you know what, this marriage isn't worth it. It isn't worth what I'm putting into it. I need to be free. But to be free is terrifying. You're in free fall when you're free. And you'll be poor. And you'll work all the hours God sends. You'll be looking after your children if you've got them, or trying to get them if you haven't got them, and trying to rear them. And yet so many women have done it. And so when I look at audiences, I speak to audiences all the time, and in England they're not running around screaming, you know, they threaten to. The LGBT lobbyists forever saying it's going to come and bust it up, and they never come. And you think, yes, men rule women by threats. Didn't mean to say men. So I get very used to that. That happens all the time. But the English don't frighten easy, and they don't usually give in. And also we don't have a thing that's happening in Australia you have to do something about, which is that the police, when they have to bring in extra security because there is a speaker who might cause outrage, which is practically inevitable now, the police are sending people bills for $76,000 to pay for the extra policing. Don't let that happen. That will muzzle you. And the universities and the other institutions have got to resist that and say, no, you know, we'll cover it with our own security, rather than let the police do it and then use it as a way of preventing the university or whatever the organisation is from having any future meetings to thrash out what are real problems and confusions. And what's going on in Istanbul, which I think is important, is something we should be prepared to thrash out. We've got to talk about it. And the really scary thing is that the British, who helped to draft it, have not ratified it. But no one's discussing why they haven't ratified it. We have to discuss that, because I think I know why they're not ratifying it, because it doesn't fit with the British legal system. And making it fit would be a nightmare. And you see, once you actually accept that idea, that you've got trivial rape way down one end, and very common, every house in the street, and at the other end you've got vicious rapes that leave women maimed, or you've also got sexual murders. This is a continuum. And when you think about it, you think, where do we draw the lines? Like the people who asked me last night at the meeting, you know, is it all right if a woman wants you to call her degrading names? I mean, all I can think is, you call me a degrading name and I'm on the bus, mate. I'm gone. If in order to get your cock to stand up, you have to treat me like a piece of dirt, then I'm not interested.
That romantic, really.
No, please.
Well, thank you so much for writing this essay and for making us think. And thank you for your contribution. You're on our wall, just here.
A nice picture as well.
A nice picture. So thank you so much for your contribution and for, making us think. And you're a teacher, and it's your job to sort of pull things apart and to make everyone freak out a little bit. But I think that it's a productive conversation and probably one of the most important that we're having at the moment. So thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate it.
I've enjoyed myself this morning. Thank you.
Thank you. This podcast was produced by Elissa Ratliff and me, Jessie Stephens, for the Mamamia Podcast Network. You can find Germaine Greer's book On Rape at any good bookstore or at apple.co/Mamamia. And you can read my article with Germaine on mamamia.com.au. Mia will be back in your ears next Monday, so don't stress.